Hello again and welcome back. We were here at the start of EuroPCom.
And now we're here at the end to pick out some of the key themes and discussions we've seen here this week and to look ahead to what will hopefully be a very different year next year.
And we're glad to have you with us. Thanks for your engagement and participation. First up, we want to ask you a question.
What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the EU? This week we've been looking at three key sectors: digital, citizens' engagement and the Green Deal.
All of them are vital for the future of Europe. You could even say that all of them are vital for the survival of Europe.
You now see a QR code on your screen. You can scan it and reply to the question.
Looking forward to your answers. Of course, it's all important.
What is the biggest challenge facing the EU? Waiting for your answers. Digital, citizens' involvement. No votes for climate emergency. And now we have some great guests for the live closing session. So let's meet them. We have Assya Kavrakova from the European Citizen Action Service.
We have Ieva Cesnulaityte, a policy analyst at the OECD.
And welcome also to Koen Thewissen. We'll learn more about what he does a little later on.
Now, the great advantage of the digital revolution is that it's open to all of us, whoever we are, wherever we are.
Citizens are at the heart of digital progress because digital has the power to strengthen our societies and our democracies by enabling us to participate even more in decisions affecting our lives.
Now, let's have a look back at some of this week's highlights from the discussions about engaging Europe's citizens.
A little look back. A little look back at the very first day of EuroPCom 2020.
What is the core idea of the conference?
It's focused mainly on citizens.
Why do we need it right now?
This will be a major democratic exercise.
It's for all. It's about feedback and it's about follow-up.
From Rome to Amsterdam to Lisbon.
From every corner of Europe.
We integrated,
Celebrate.
one voice,
One sound.
one unity.
It's very important, and this is really something that will be open to everybody.
I mean, it's a very European thing again, so it's going to be very complex.
It's a bit like the search for the Holy Grail, and maybe this conference could also come up with some new ideas about how more participation and representative democracy can be familiarized to have better results at the European level.
I'm going to talk about citizens' assemblies, how they function as vehicles for democratic participation.
If I can contribute anything, I contribute towards making it a good place for them to grow up.
So I want to come to the question on the Future of Europe conference and how to make this process inclusive. It's a major challenge at a transnational level, but it will be necessary because I can't imagine a process for the future of Europe without a transnational confrontation between citizens.
So it's really in our interest to speak up if we feel that things are not right. And that's not just in communications. I really believe that that's right across everything we do in our lives. If we see something that is off, we speak up.
Citizens' assemblies give ordinary people extraordinary access to information and expertise and invite them to formulate their own responses.
Are we searching for a new identity?
Or are we afraid to lose our own sovereignty?
Are we European only when it suits us?
Or also if Europe needs us?
Do you believe in a European demos?
Then what is our European telos?
And the digital world is one of boundless possibilities, one of which, of course, is instant interaction with you.
And so we'd like to ask you in this next Slido, do you know which European country is crowdsourcing ideas online for a new constitution?
Check out the QR code on the screen and give us your answer. I'm curious what the answer is.
Crowdsourcing EU legislation. Italy is an option.
Ireland and France.
Interesting. Rome, so Italy.
Italy and Ireland are the biggest options right now. We've got some new ones coming in. And we also have Belgium. Don't know how it is here. The Netherlands.
Spain.
And to give us the answer, Assya?
And the answer is Iceland, and it's a very fascinating example how crowdsourcing legislation can be upscaled from local to national level, which gives us high hopes that we can implement it at European level one day.
Crowdsourcing EU legislation, well, that would truly be a revolution. But maybe it's not such an absurd idea and a way of bringing the EU closer to the people it serves.
Citizens are those who are the final beneficiaries of all the decisions of politicians and decision makers. So therefore, their inclusion is necessary in order to legitimize those decisions and to make sure that they are relevant for people and for those who, after that, will live with those decisions on a daily basis.
Assya, you've been looking this week at ways to enhance the quality of the EU's engagement with its citizens. What are some of the new ways emerging to bring people on board?
There are a number of new ways to do that. They're called, in recent years, democratic innovation methods, and they mainly take place at local level and sometimes at national level. We are just starting now to experiment with those methods at European level. Here we are talking about citizens' assemblies with randomly selected citizens that are representative of the population. We are talking about multilingual crowdsourcing platforms soliciting the wisdom of the crowd, as well as ethical social listening.
Tell us more about this concept of citizen assemblies.
Citizens' assemblies are very well-designed methods of engaging citizens. They are based on the approach that you involve randomly selected citizens, but in a way so that they're representative of the different layers of society. For example, in terms of age, in terms of gender, of professional occupation, and you bring them together in order to deliberate on a certain issue. In that way, what you ensure is that all possible viewpoints of society are represented in those deliberations. And the results are really astonishing. There are new ideas coming up, and it's a very, very rewarding exercise for both sides, the decision makers who are brave enough to do that, and the citizens who have agreed to participate.
Koen, you're the founder of wearedaniel, an interesting name. Tell us more.
We are a strategic communication agency. And the idea is that we try to combine scientific insights with real-life strategies. So what we do is we try to find out who is working within an academic context on different communication topics, and then we take that knowledge and we move them to the real world. So we link academics to real-life strategic problems.
And
that's what we do.
Who's Daniel?
Yeah, so Daniel Kahneman is a psychologist, and he won a Nobel Prize in 2002. It was a Nobel Prize of Economics. And that was one of the first times, and I think the first time, that a psychologist won a Nobel Prize of Economics. And when that happened, the economists were freaking out, because this was the field of psychologists to work in, of course. And Kahneman had a very specific insight into economics. And his insight was that when we make decisions, then we are way less rational than we tend to think that we are. So when we make decisions, we tend to make intuitive, instinctive decisions and not rational decisions. And of course, economics and the field of economics was always saying that economics is a very rational domain and feelings and emotions do not have a role to play within the economic field. And Kahneman came in with a lot of research and he showed that even in this serious environment of economics, that emotion and instinct was still really, really present. And that was something that the economists didn't like to hear.
Emotion and instinct, powerful forces shaping our democratic choices and our responses to the biggest issues of the day, like climate change. Here's a wrap-up of some of the dialogue we've seen this week on all things green.
Let me tell you like it is, because it's time for reflection on our constant traction, on the people and the union, on the planet and the nation, because these relations are in dire need of reparations. They seem to be broken as the global pandemic is just another token.
COVID-19 gives us a practical example of what can happen when scientists and experts are ignored.
This is not about the planet or the pangolin. This is about the people. And in fact, it's about the survival of humanity.
A precondition to support behavior change is to create a desire for change.
It's not actually about science. It's about our imagination. I have a son. He thinks the world will come to an end in 2050 because he watches Netflix. If we put in people's mind that it's a lost battle, no one is going to want to accept hard choices in their lives.
I've been a member of the European Parliament. I've been a minister. I know it all. Targets, discussions. No one gets that, guys. Take off the diesel-powered buses from our streets in 5 years. Boom. You're going to see the effect immediately.
How can I not be hopeful? We have no choice. We have to make it.
Oh my, hail to our white-bearded climate pope. Let's build a beautiful shrine as Timmermans closes the last coal mine.
It was a pleasure hosting this session, and I hope that in 10 years where we look back at this and say, okay, this was where we started really doing stuff.
Ieva, I want to come to you now because we heard from Koen about the challenges of decision-making in a democracy. You have a question for us related to your own research?
Deliberative processes most of the time don't happen in isolation, but rather together with other forms of citizen participation. Which of them do you think is the most popular to be used with deliberative processes? Options: roundtable discussions, calls for ideas and proposals, or public consultations.
So what we see here is that most people consider themselves to be less biased than the average person. And that is something that we always see. Sometimes about 80% of respondents will say, I'm less biased than average people. But that is called the bias blindness spot. And that means that we like to see ourselves as being more rational than others, than being less driven by intuition and by emotions than others. But we also know that that's not true. We are just as biased as everybody else. And what's maybe the bad news is that even if you're very well educated, even if you have a lot of experience, and even if you know that biases exist, that doesn't mean that you're less biased. That makes you just as biased as everybody else.
Back to Assya, and a question for you about the conference on the future of Europe, which has been much talked about this week. And the question is, the EU is often criticized for not listening enough to its citizens. What makes you think this process will be any different?
We have high hopes that this will be a new beginning in the citizens' engagement with the EU decision-making process, that it will go beyond just listening and connecting with citizens, but it will lead to real engagement and co-production of solutions for Europe. There are plenty of new methods that can be experimented with in the framework of the conference, so that the conference itself can become an example of the democratic innovation at EU level.
Sure, but 10 years ago the Lisbon Treaty introduced the European Citizen Initiative, which enables people to come together to ask for EU action on a specific issue. Shouldn't we be making more use of this specific tool?
The European Citizen Initiative is a unique tool of transnational participatory democracy. There is no one like it in the world, but it's a complex one. It's for those who are much prepared and committed to put effort in time in order to put the issues on the agenda of the European decision-making process. It's not a tool for everyday use. If we want to check regularly and on a daily basis the pulse of citizens, we need new methods complementing the European Citizens Initiative.
Well, the role of the digital revolution is presenting some of these new methods, and they're rapidly taking hold. Let's show you a quick recap of the digital dialogue that has taken place at EuroPCom this week.
Good morning to you, and thanks so much for being with us here at EuroPCom Talks.
Engagement means really talking to people. It really means taking the time to listen, to address people's anxieties and fears.
Europe can be stronger against big tech corporations and challenge them to get the interest of the user first.
The hybrid way of working became our everyday life.
We're all scrambling for best practice. I think it's experience and lived experience through this that will bring us the best values. We're writing it as we're living through it.
You have to give them content that they want to see. On TikTok, it's not a hold up a sign kind of campaign where you say I'm with whatever you're supporting. It's a platform where you need people to engage and be able to be creative, and that's what we were able to give them for Climate.
So Twitch is the obvious one that comes to mind, and so Twitch is owned by Amazon.
As a psychologist and really having a look at the psychology of the social media user.
Engagement is actually the best for advertisers. The more people are engaged, the more they are addicted to the platform, the more you can show advertisement. So that's the business model.
Ieva, a question for you from our viewers. How do you think citizens' engagement needs to change after we emerge from the pandemic?
So far, these processes have been mostly face-to-face because they usually take at least from 1 day to longer, and they require citizens to deliberate amongst themselves to reach a consensus. So it's also like an oral deliberation. However, right now, many of such processes that have started before the pandemic had to find ways to either continue or happen online. And practitioners all over the world have been experimenting with different digital tools to ensure that these processes can continue online. For me, a truly inclusive debate is the one that firstly allows everybody an equal chance and opportunity to take part in the debate, meaning that all citizens, all groups of citizens have the capacity to, in terms of access to the platforms where the debate is going on, ability to dedicate their time to the discussion. So if there is a need, maybe a compensation for their time or provide a childcare or things like that, or ability to come if the debate is face-to-face. So really is reducing all of the barriers of participation.
But Europe's a very different political structure compared to regional and even national governments.
One can say that there is a gap. But also, it's normal to have a gap because the European decision-making process is quite complex. It also takes place at a distance from where citizens naturally are. It's one thing, of course, to follow decisions which are taken closer to where you are, for example, at local level, and it's a bit more complicated to be really part of a decision making which is so complex with so many players and which takes place away from you.
Koen, let me come back to you with another question sent in yesterday. What's driving the public's reluctance to engage with science, and how do we manage it?
Okay, so if you talk about sustainability, there is two things you can do. You can ask a majority of people and ask them, what do you think we should do? And their opinion is influenced by media. It's influenced by populist movements. It's influenced by interest groups. Or you can look at science and ask science, what do you think we should do? And that opinion is probably kind of pure because there is scientific proof behind it. In our current system, we don't have tools to decide between the two. There is a combination of the two that we use. Science has to try to infiltrate the public narrative enough so that people as a majority will ask politicians to use science as a base. But the question is that the right model? Why don't we trust science as such? And why don't we give science the potential to make decisions instead of kind of society as a whole? And it's a really, really tough question. And I worked in politics and I don't know what the answer is. I've seen that politics is struggling with this question because it always has to find a way to make truth become truth, because it's not truth as such because of the democratic system. But that's an ethical question that brings us a bit too far.
Assya, Koen touched on populism and its rise across Europe, and that populism is often directed at the EU. So should the EU take a step back or engage even more?
I believe that the European Union has to make an effort to go beyond communication into a real engagement with citizens. We live in very fragmented societies nowadays. Many of citizens are polarized and have very many different opinions based on controversies. We know that this is exploited quite well by populist movements, and therefore, as a representative of the democratic sphere, the European Union has the obligation and the responsibility to bridge those gaps and those controversies and to engage citizens into decision-making process which is based on the European values.
And how do you think the EU is managing that obligation?
My feeling is that the communication of the European institutions goes one way. And I believe that in order to produce the results they're looking for, there should be a much more collaborative and engagement methods of communicating with citizens, like providing them with the opportunities to provide ideas for solutions and not only to listen to the suggestions of the decision makers.
Ieva, would you say the EU needs to work harder at communicating with citizens?
Yes, absolutely. So communication is actually key in terms of first letting people know what is taking place in the public sphere, but also to engaging them in the process, because only by having timely information on channels that actually people access all of the different audiences that the policy, let's say, relates to, and also communicate it in a way that is accessible to people in a simple and clear language with all of the necessary material is key, just for firstly for making people aware of what's going on in the public sphere, but also facilitating the debate and also participation. So it's, absolutely. I mean, besides social media, so of course, governments are encouraged to use their websites and make them most accessible as possible, but also there are different participation platforms that you can set up specifically for a purpose of participation that can be such as, let's say, Decidim, which are interactive and allow for different functions of not only communicating information that is necessary for participation, but actually setting up this participation as well, such as different forums, roundtable discussions, ability to suggest your ideas and other types of more novel interactions as well. But also, I mean, in my opinion, government should use all of the communication tools available to them. So going from press releases to speaking to the public, press conferences, to going to speak to people face to face. So yeah, I'm not an expert on communications, but that's my opinion.
Well, that brings me nicely to our next question put by one of our viewers. How can the EU create a productive space for dialogue?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, you have to allow citizens enough time to participate, meaning that they would have to get unbiased and clear and it's simply written information about the policy issue that they're going to have to either provide recommendations or opinion or discuss, and allow them for time to actually take a look at this information to discuss with one another. So you sort of have to create a space for them where such debate is possible. So one of the ways to reduce these barriers of participation is by creating a space where they have the time and the resources to participate. And secondly, as I mentioned, you have to ensure that they are able to participate. So let's say, make sure they have the resources to come and spend their time in this participation regarding, you know, if they have kids or jobs at that time or other responsibilities. So you have to make sure that it's at the time where it's possible for them and they are either compensated or helped to participate if they need so. Other things are also, let's say, public decision making, there has to be a link to it. So it means that if citizens are to participate, they have to feel that there's a motivation for them to participate, and they feel a motivation to participate when they can feel a clear link in between the decision-making process and the participatory process that they're taking part in. So citizens are very good at understanding whether something is worth their time. So if they feel that whatever they either recommend or suggest is not really going to be taken seriously, or they are not going to engage. So it's another barrier of participation. So the link to power.
Koen, a question for you now from our viewers. Are we moving towards the end of conventional systems of citizens' representation?
Well, that brings us to the question of democracy and how does democracy work and what is the most effective way to structure a society. And my personal view is that democracy today, because of the understanding that we have of how people vote and how people can be influenced to vote for a certain person or a certain party, with the knowledge that we have today, we cannot look at democracy in the old way anymore, because democracy as such is flawed as well. People make decisions and vote for persons that are not always the best for them. We slowly start to really understand why people vote for certain parties and why people vote for certain persons. And if we understand that, we can also manipulate people into voting for certain people. And that then brings us to the question, is democracy still something that is neutral and that can really represent society as a whole? Or is democracy something that can be hacked by people that really, really know how to influence behavior?
So you're talking about influencing people in a democratic system. How will you approach that? And will it be ethical?
Yeah, so I'm working in two fields. I'm working in the field of politics and organizations that are dealing, for example, with public health, to really nudge people through these organizations towards the right behavior. And of course, there is a bit of an ethical question, because if you're working for a political party, what is the right behavior? It is voting for that party, but you can also manipulate people in a way. Or if so there is an ethical question attached to this question, to the topic of decision making. There is an ethical question that is always present. How do we make people make the right decision? Immediately implies that we kind of know what the right decision is. And in a political field, that's dangerous. But for example, if we talk about healthy living, if we talk about healthy eating, if we talk about taking sustainability seriously, I think there is no ethical question. We know what needs to be done, and we can then move people in that direction without asking the question like, am I doing the right thing?
And finally, Ieva, what's the one message you would pass on from EuroPCom this week?
Well, I mean, I think like these days governments have to be ready to engage with the, you know, different ways that opinions are presented. So also these types of like governments are faced, they want it or not, with these types of movements, let's say. So they have to engage with them also again in a constructive way. But some of the ideas that let's say these more radical movements suggest, that as citizens assemblies and juries, are these are the things that some governments are actually already doing. So some of the ideas that seem quite radical that are proposed by them, that actually have already been implemented in many countries around the world. And in fact, the OECD report, Catching the Deliberative Wave, we have collected almost 300 examples of such citizens' juries and citizens' assemblies done by the governments, initiated by the governments. So, of course, I mean, I think it's great that there are grassroots initiatives that are promoting these sort of like innovative discussions around how our democracy is going to look like in the future. And on the other hand, governments are actually catching up with some of these ideas and applying them to the systems that are in place.
Well, thanks to you all, Koen, Ieva and Assya, for being with us today to round off what has been an unconventional EuroPCom.
But also an unmissable EuroPCom, which has given us a fresh perspective in learning from the communication challenges of the pandemic and applying these lessons to the EU's engagement with citizens in the coming years.
Thanks also to you for your company, your questions and your contributions over the past 2 days. EuroPCom is over for another year.
But we look forward to seeing you again in person next time.